In all the days of the Third Age, after the fall of Gil-Galad, Master Elrond abode in Imladris, and he gathered there many elves and other folk of wisdom and power from among all the kindreds of Middle-earth, and he preserved, through many lives of men, the memory of all that had been fair. Megovan and Melen, I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Yoistin here, and today I wanted to take a relaxing journey into the Vale of Imladris, on the western side of the Misty Mountains. Let's discuss the history of Rivendell from its beginnings to the last pieces of lore that we know concerning the Elven lands in the early Fourth Age. Thank you guys for joining me today. Let's get right into it. The beginning of Rivendell's history starts in the year 1697 of the Second Age, during the War of the Elves and Sauron. This war began nearly a century after the forging of the One Ring of Power. In an effort under the leadership of Elrond, Gil-Galad sent his herald to lead many elves of Lindon to help Celebrimbor and his elves of Eregion, as the Dark Lord had overcome them. But Elrond Half-Elven's forces met with Celeborn's elves in Eregion, and all of them were pushed back out of the region. So, in order to survive, the elves went northeast into the lands of the Trollshaws, and more specifically, the hills of Rudar. After passing over the river Brunin, the elves came into a valley, sheltered and hidden by the foothills of the Misty Mountains. There the elves took refuge, at the edge of the gorge of the Brunin River, and they were besieged by the Dark Lord's forces for 3 years. However, the elves withstood Sauron's siege, and soon they learned that secrecy and the power to defend themselves were some of the best attributes of Imladris, which meant Clovendell. There were a few entrances to this valley, one of the main ones coming from the nearby fords of Brunin. Eventually, the siege was lifted with the help of Gil-Galad and his forces, as well as Tar Ministir's men from Numenor. Thus, Rivendell had peace for a time, and it became known as the last homely house east of the sea, from the point of view of a traveler going east to Rovanion and beyond. And it was also known as the first homely house from the point of view of a traveler heading west into central Eriador or beyond. After the siege was lifted, the first White Council was held, and Elrond was made Gil-Galad's vice-regent, whose seat was in Imladris, and Eregion was thus abandoned, in favor of Rivendell. During the time of the council in 1701, Elrond would meet his future wife Celebrian for the first time, who had come to live in Rivendell for many years as well. Eventually, Gil-Galad gave Elrond the Elven ring Vilya, and the half-elven loremaster would use Vilya to strengthen, defend, and secure Rivendell for the rest of the age and the age to come. Rivendell was needed again, however, to strategize yet another war with Sauron in the Second Age. In the midst of the War of the Last Alliance, specifically 3441 to 3444 of the Second Age, High King Elendil and High King Gil-Galad would muster their forces, arms, and strategies in Rivendell, working out how to fight Sauron in the years to come in the closing of the Second Age. When the last alliance left Rivendell, Isildur, son of Elendil, would leave his wife and son Valandil behind in Rivendell, and he would not return to them due to the disaster of the Gladden Fields. Hope for men was not lost, however, as this would be the first, but not the last time Rivendell was home to a future king. Valandil was given the shards of Narsil, and likely the other heirlooms of his house as well, as his brothers had also been slain alongside his father in the Gladden Fields. Valandil had luckily been too young to go off to war with his family, and afterwards Valandil moved to Annúminas to rule Arnor in their stead, but he had survived to become king, thanks only to Rivendell. Thus, we begin to look at Rivendell in the Third Age. The amount of inhabitants in Rivendell would grow, as elves such as Glorfindel, Eristor, Gildor, Lindir, and the children of Elrond and Celebrian would live there. Besides Lindon, Rivendell would be the chief settlement of the elves in Eriador in the Third Age, as Gil-Galad had fallen, and the elves were no longer so united as they once were under their lord. However, Rivendell and its inhabitants remained close with the descendants of Isildur, as the great ancestor of that line was Elros, the brother of Elrond. However, as the kingdom of Arnor began to break, and Angmar started to rise in the mid-Third Age, war came once again to Rivendell. In the year 1409 of the Third Age, Angmar, under the leadership of the Witch King, invaded Eriador, and the elves of Rivendell united with those of Lindon and Lothlorien to push Angmar back for many years, securing the safety and location of Rivendell. This would not end the conflict, however, but it did save Rivendell from danger. Angmar would return in 1975 to finish off the North Kingdom, but the elves of Rivendell would fight alongside the men of Gondor in the Battle of Fornost to stop Angmar once and for all. Although Arnor would eventually be lost, Rivendell would survive, and from then on, starting with the second chieftain of the Dunedain Rangers all the way on to Aragorn, all of the chieftains would be fostered in Rivendell for a time as children, and the heirlooms and some historical documents of the House of Isildur would be safe in Rivendell, including the Ring of Barahir that was secured from the Losoth after the fall of Arvedui and the Shards of Narsil, as well as other artifacts. And so, after the fall of Arnor, Rivendell continued to be and grew even more into a haven of lore and wisdom, rather than being a place of battle or war. Rivendell remained a hidden valley, and it grew in the power only to defend itself. Travel and likely trade occurred between Imladris and Lothlorien, as Elrond was wedded to the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. This friendship was still strong even after Celebrian was forced to sail west after being assaulted by orcs on a journey between the two elven lands. Speaking of alliances, meetings of the Second White Council would take place in Rivendell, and during the second meeting, in 2851 of the Third Age, Gandalf argued for the council to attack Dol Guldur and Sauron, as he had recently discovered the identity of the necromancer, but Saruman disagreed with this. It's interesting, however, as such an attack could have prolonged or even prevented the need to discuss the ring in Rivendell again over a century and a half later during the events of the Fellowship of the Ring. The White Council would meet again in 2941 to decide to attack Dol Guldur. That same year, Rivendell appeared in the events of The Hobbit, as Thorin's company would take refuge in Rivendell on the way towards Erebor, and Elrond would provide them vital information concerning moonletters on Erebor's secret door. Bilbo and Gandalf would also visit Rivendell on their way back from this journey, and it likely helped convince Bilbo to retire there, as he would in 3001 of the Third Age. Finally, we come to the events concerning Rivendell during the time of the Lord of the Rings. Glorfindel and other elves would set out from Rivendell in the autumn of 3018 of the Third Age, looking for Aragorn and the four hobbits in the Trollshaws. Glorfindel would find them and help them get to Imladris. Sometime later, all of the fates and goals of the free peoples in Middle-earth would intertwine in what is likely the most impactful council of the whole Legendarium, the Council of Elrond. Representatives came to Rivendell from nearly all of the free peoples, and together they discussed many ideas, thoughts, and problems to eventually form the Fellowship of the Ring. Shortly after the council, the elves of Rivendell would reforge the Shards of Narsil to create Andúril, the Flame of the West, for the last chieftain of the Dunedain, Aragorn, son of Arathorn. After the War of the Ring and the destruction of the One Ring, Elrond's ring Vilya faded, and so too did the power of Rivendell diminish, and the elven powers to keep that land nearly timeless. On their way back to the Shire after the War of the Ring, Gandalf and the hobbits visited Rivendell and Bilbo once again, and stayed there for some time before continuing on their journey west. During this time, Bilbo would give Frodo the manuscript of There and Back Again in the Red Book of Westmarch that he had completed during his time in Rivendell. Before the hobbits made this return journey, Elrond's daughter Arwen would marry her very distant cousin Aragorn, and she would leave Rivendell for Gondor. Eventually, many of the elves of Imladris and Bilbo would depart the lands of Middle-earth for good. Elrond too would leave, but his sons Elladan and Elrohir would maintain Rivendell for a time, and they were eventually joined by Celeborn, their grandfather, in Rivendell. However, they would all of them sail west eventually, and before the passing of Aragorn in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Aragorn said that none now walked in the gardens of Elrond, implying that all of the elves had left that land. And so, one of the greatest lands of elves diminished into the later ages of Arda, but there is always much to remember about it. Rivendell was always a place of elven culture. Songs of days past were sung, tales were told, and merry times were had, whether it was within the Hall of Fire or out upon the grass lawns, under the trees, sun, and stars. Tolkien mentions these artistic moments often when the stories go to Rivendell. There was much of all elven culture that had been in Middle-earth to be found there, Sindarin and Noldorian both. It was not a place of conflict, but a place of remembrance and learning. However, the sea was not really represented here, other than in the name, the last homely house east of the sea. This could be because Rivendell was a place that dwelt in remembrance and the past, and although the sea was a part of the Elven past, it was also the way forward, as the elves needed to sail over the sea to get home to Valinor. Or it could be that the sea was not close enough to Rivendell to be fairly represented within Imladris. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. Why wasn't the sea represented in Rivendell? Though Rivendell was a timeless place, it too diminished in Middle-earth, but it lived on in the hearts of its people in the Undying Lands forever. From Rivendell, we learn that reverence, remembrance, comfort, and home are important things to any being, and these pieces of life should be respected. But we also see that all things must diminish, just as Rivendell did, no matter where in time we fixate ourselves. So we should remember, yes, but we should also be present in the moment, as the folk of Rivendell were when the world needed them to be. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. Let me know your thoughts on Rivendell in the comments below. For me, it is one of my favorite elven lands in the Legendarium, due to its history, artifacts, and culture. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter. And if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider donating to us on Patreon. Links for those are in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today, and I will see you guys next week with a video on what happened to Thorn's company after the events of The Hobbit. Everyone, as always, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.